The regular season is heating up, new stars are emerging, and that means more opportunities to win up to 25 times your cash on Prize Picks, the most exciting way to play daily fantasy sports. Just select 2 or more players, pick more or less on their projection on a wide variety of stats, and place your entry. It's that easy. Let it fly to turn $10 into $250 with just a few taps. Easy gameplay, quick withdrawals, and injury insurance on your picks are what make Prize Picks the #1 daily fantasy sports app. Watch your favorite players and get paid doing it this basketball season. See your entries make progress during the game or make new entries for the second half and the fourth quarter. 3-pointers, assists, rebounds, and everything in between are yours for the taking. Join the Prize Picks community of more than 7 million players who have already signed up. Right now, Prize Picks will match your first deposit of up to $100. Just download the Prize Picks app and use code GET100. That's code GET100 on Prize Picks for a first deposit match of up to $100. Prize Picks. Pick more, pick less. It's that easy.
So our podcast is called Right and Wrong.
Are these your notes?
These
Are these your notes about what we're going to say?
Anything.
Nailed it.
It's the short answer.
So how many novels did you not finish?
Oh my God, so many.
It was perfect. What's she talking about? This is nonsense.
Ooh, a spicy question. I love it.
This is it, guys. The big secret to getting published is you have to write a good book. You heard it here first. Hello and welcome back to the Right and Wrong podcast. I'm Jamie, and joining me today is the queen of the contemporary Cornish novel, Liz Fenwick. Welcome to the show. Hi.
Hello, how are you?
I'm very well. How are you?
Pretty good. Still smiling.
Yeah. Coming fresh off. I mean, congratulations on your big win, the RNA's Popular Romantic Fiction Award for your latest novel. And it was just the other day that you that they had the award show and everything. How does it feel?
It still doesn't seem real. I keep looking. I've put the actual physical award itself right in front of where I sit and write to remind me that it happened because huge imposter syndrome, and that's a physical evidence. Gee, she writes books and they're not bad.
Yeah, exactly. The Romantic Novelists Association is a fantastic group, and there's such wonderful, supportive people involved with it. But this award especially, because the nominations come from librarians and booksellers and bloggers, the sort of the beating heart of the bookish world in a way.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, when I got the news, which was slightly before it was announced, I wept. I really, It was just, for so much of the time, you sit alone in a world of your own, creating books and stuff like that. And it was just so amazing. I mean, I'm at a loss for words now. It was validation, which I think as writers so much we struggle for. I mean, every time I get an email from a reader, that is validation, obviously. But this was just very public and very appreciated.
Yeah, it's amazing that The River Between Us, the winning novel, your latest novel, it's amazing that you're still at that sort of point, because I speak to a lot of people who are debut authors, and it's they have that sort of imposter syndrome, that sort of, I can't believe this is happening. But The River Between Us, is that your 9th book?
If you count the novella, yes. So it's my 8th full novel.
Right. And you still get that imposter syndrome?
All the time.
Yeah.
I have on my desk, I have my books stacked up in front of me, along with some of the foreign editions. And it's to remind me that actually I am a writer, I am a novelist, and I can do this. Because with each book, you're a beginning writer because you haven't written this story before. And you do need that reminder.
That's a beautiful way of looking at it. I'd not thought of it in the way that every story you write, you are beginning, sort of a beginner at that story.
Yeah, because I'm not a planner, so I know my ending roughly, and so each story is a new one, and for each story I am a beginner because everyone has been different. I mean, I've learned skills from each and every one that I obviously carry forward, I hope, but I try something new. I keep pushing myself as a writer to become better. Better at storytelling, not necessarily at one particular aspect of the writing. So each time I'm on a new journey.
Okay, that's interesting. Is there anything like specific you do book to book, as in like you sort of find something new, maybe a character arc or a certain sort of emotion that you want to delve into, and you say, for this book, I'm going to research this and I'm going to really focus on this thing?
Not necessarily. I'm a real writing craft book junkie.
Okay.
And I have been from the very start of my career. And I think you tend to find the craft book that you need at the right time. I remember people recommending to me Stephen King's On Writing. And I bought it and picked it up, didn't engage, bought it, picked it up, didn't engage, bought it, picked it up, didn't engage. Finally, I sat down and I read it, and so much of it really resonated with me, and I took away so much from it. Don't ask me what it is now, because we're now talking a few years ago. Aside from the fact, the thing that really made me laugh is he talks about having no distractions in your room, going into your room and not coming out until you've written. And I thought, the man has a wife. He doesn't have to do the laundry, prepare food, run a family, and everything else. And I think you'll find that if you aren't Stephen King, the world does intrude in a big way. And you have to learn to write around it. So of late, the writing books that have really resonated with me are emotional fiction by Donald Mass. And I always tap into his books, all of them. They're brilliant. And Story Genius by Lisa Cron. And she makes it sound simple. And she talks about planning a bit more. I still can't do the way that she suggests writing, which is much more planning, but I find she's really good for revision. And I also have it on audiobook. So sometimes when I'm out for my many plot walks, I'll have that on for half the walk, because she's asking questions that makes me think deeper into my story, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
And the same, Donald Mass is also on audiobook, and I will listen to him as I walk around, and it makes me ask questions to go further into the story and to a deeper level, because my first drafts are the surface. I get the story down, and it's only in subsequent drafts. I'm not one of these clean writers that I build the layers and I go deeper. And my husband's recently retired, and I'm now using him a little bit as a test beta reader. And it was funny. He came to me and he said, oh, really good in the surface, but I don't know what she's thinking. And I'm thinking, I've forgotten that. Because I was so focused on getting all the key points in that particular chapter, which was a juicy one. So I find these are all kind of tricks of the trade to help me. And plot walking, whether I have a headphone plugged in and I'm thinking, or sometimes just letting anything surface. And I'm forever, letting those thoughts come to me, and I'll stop in the middle of a lane or a footpath or whatever and whip out the phone and quickly writing down notes that I've got to go back in and do this.
That's really interesting. And I often do a plot walk as well, or if I'm just stuck on it, I'll just go for a wander, get some fresh air, clear my head, and just let sort of the ideas sort of swirl and stew on their own, I guess.
Well, I kind of think that things bump around. I know that's a funny thing to say. Yeah. But, and when they get shuffled, sometimes they fall into the right place.
Yes. Yeah. Like when you go and watch someone else playing Scrabble and you can see all the letters, and as soon as you're sitting down playing Scrabble, you can't make a single word.
Exactly.
Oh, yeah. And it's also really interesting because when you look at different craft, there's so many different craft books and lectures and series and things like masterclass, things like that online. And I've watched a few of the masterclasses. I've watched all of Brandon Sanderson's lectures on YouTube. And the thing that I think it's very important, and a lot of them do say, like, there is no one way of writing. And like you could, and I'm sure that, as you mentioned, you kind of like some things from some books and some things from other books, and it's like it's all about taking the bits that work for you, I think, and then sort of applying those.
Yeah, and I have found that my needs have changed.
Yeah.
And what I need to pull from a book is different now. It's just one of those things. It was back when I was trying to get published, a agent who is now a writer, Lucy Whitehouse, was very kind to me. And although she rejected me, we met for coffee, and she said, this is the book that you need to read, which was Solstein's Solutions for Writers, I think. It's one of the Solstein books. And I read it, and it just blew my mind, and particularly on the aspect of showing, not telling, because that didn't really make sense to me. And I read that, and I really absorbed it. And recently, I downloaded his book on audio. It must have been on buy two, buy one, get one free.
Yeah.
And listening to it again and pulling out vastly different things than the first time that I'd read and underlined and so forth. So I think there's a lot to be said for revisiting. Mm-hmm. And just how you change as a writer. And I work with two other writers very closely, Deborah Harkness and Bridget Cody. And the three of us, one, write very different things, two, write in very different manners. And it's really helpful to see that there's no one way.
Yeah, for sure. And even just, I mean, if I imagine if I took all the authors that I've had on this podcast, of which Lucy Whitehouse was one, if I took all of them and then sort of just went down the planner or sort of pantser approach, it would be almost a 50-50 split, I think. I think it would probably be in the pantser favor. But the point is, like, even when it comes down to something as fundamentally simple as that, it's like, there are way more nuanced things that we all do differently and approach differently. But yeah, it's such a unique and personal craft, I think.
It is, and it's not carved in stone. I think every book demands something different of us, every story that we decide to tell. Yeah. I mean, there have been times where I've had to do Post-its on a wall, and I'm not a Post-it person. I like the concept of doing, different color Post-its and you can move them. It just doesn't work for me. One, because I have cats and they like Post-its. And so key plot points walk away. But, I have to work in a notebook. For that sort of thing. And it's only after the first draft's done that I can begin to color block. I'm very visual. So, different plot points are different colors along with different characters. And if I lost my notebook, I'd be in terrible shape. But at least it can't walk away with a cat.
Yeah. Yes, indeed. It sounds like you're sort of very aware of how you as a writer have sort of grown and kind of built up more skills through the years. Was writing, if we go way back, was writing always something that you knew you wanted to do?
Yes, in the sense that I was an only child. And my father's father lived with us, and he was from Ireland and loved to tell stories and loved poetry in particular, and used to recite it. He knew it by heart. And so visually, there were lots of images that must have stayed with me. And I loved books and I loved stories. And in my head, I would continue the stories that had been read to me. And eventually that turned into me writing that, or, early fan fiction, if you will. And then eventually wanting to tell my own stories. Which I wanted to. I mean, I'm originally from the States, so even in my high school yearbook, it mentions stories. And then I did my degree in English literature, despite the fact that I'm a dyslexic. And my senior thesis was 3/4 of a novel. So it's always been there. And then my first job on leaving university was to research, compile, and write and edit a history of a small island off of Massachusetts. That experience slightly put me off writing, because I was writing for a committee and I swore I'd never do that again. because you couldn't satisfy all the different things. I mean, to a certain extent, I write for a committee now because there's so many people that have input in when you're being published, and it's a very collaborative thing. But ultimately, I can put my foot down and not change something if I truly believe that it's integral to the story that I want to tell. At that point, I couldn't. So I then went off, got qualifications, lived my life, moved from Boston to London, met the man who's now my husband, traveled the world, had 3 kids, ran an international volunteer organization. And suddenly in 2004, I had sent out the Christmas letter, and my godmother, may she rest in peace, she just passed this past year. She said to me, when are you going to get back to fiction? And that year at New Year, I made the promise, we were doing resolutions. I said, I'm going to write more. I didn't say anybody that it was fiction. And we were living in Dubai at that point, and I decided I'd write a Mills and Boon. It was 50,000 words, and I went out and I bought all the ones I could find, did my research, wrote the novel. We moved back that year. We transferred from Dubai back to the UK, got a friend to proofread it because, as I say, I'm dyslexic, and I got a computer rejection. My one and only computer rejection, I hasten to add, because, and it was very much right. There's no question about it. I have that in hard copy. I am afraid to even look at it. But I found the Romantic Novelists Association because of it. And I joined the New Writer Scheme. And I don't know who my first reader was, but I bless them every day because they said, you can write, but you need to look where your voice fits. And that was in 2005. And I proceeded to write a new book every year for the New Writer Scheme, slowly evolving, and I'd go back and I'd rewrite. I didn't rewrite the first one that was rejected, I hasten to add, but rewrite and learn from those things, so that when I got my first agent in 2011, that was actually with my 3rd book, but I was working on my 7th.
Oh, okay. Right, I see. So were you submitting one at a time? Presumably you were submitting them to sort of specific groups of agents.
It's interesting. I, because of the RNA, I had that lull period where I really wasn't quite sure where my writing was going.
Yeah.
And I was finding my voice. And I'll come back to voice. Remind me to come back to voice. It took me quite a while to do that. So I'd be going to RNA events, and you'd meet editors and agents all the time. I had nothing to sell. So I became very interested in them and their lives. I'm a curious person. I'm a writer, after all. And so by the time I actually had something, I had people who were more than willing to look at it. So at that point, I never sat in the slush pile. And I also learned about positive rejections. The book that was eventually my first published book, The Cornish House, was read in full by a couple of editors direct without an agent. And they came back and said to me, this isn't quite right. We'd like to see your next work. And so I went on to do it. But it took me a real great amount of time to find my voice. And I was at the York Festival of Writing, the first one that they had, when I suddenly realized that what I was trying to do was Daphne du Maurier meets Jodi Picoult, or Cornwall with issues. And in the end, I found my own place, but I suddenly could phrase that, which I couldn't before, because I thought, because I'm a really happy sort of person, that I would write very happy sort of books. But in the end, what it came down to is I wanted to tell a bigger, deeper story. I mean, one of the biggest problems with that first Mills and Boon that I wrote is the 2 most interesting characters were the 2 small boys in the book. Now, that doesn't really fit, does it? Yeah. So I needed to find a way. I needed to find my voice. And I think voice is one of the trickiest things. One of my writing buddies, Bridget Cody, her voice was so strong from anything that she writes, but she struggles with the whole plot aspect. I don't struggle with plot, but I did struggle with voice. And we were at a concert together at the Royal Albert Hall, an Elfie Bow concert.
Oh, wow.
That I had been given. And he has the most amazing voice.
Yeah.
Okay. You know, when he sings Bring Him Home from Les Mis, I'm in buckets. But that night, he also sang Sweet Child of Mine.
Oh.
And it didn't work. Sorry, Alfie. But, you know, his voice wasn't right for the song.
Yeah.
And I'll give you if he sang a couple of country songs, and it was fine because there was a big story he was telling, and a country music tends to allow you to tell a very big story, just like musicals or opera or so forth. Yeah. And the best example of two different styles is The Sound of Silence by Garfunkel.
Simon
Garfunkel. Yeah. But there's a cover of it done by Disturbed.
Yes, yeah, I know it.
I almost think it's better than the original. But that's two different voices singing the same words. So sometimes, and it's telling almost a different story. So I think as a writer, you have to find out whether you're Simon and Garfunkel or Disturbed, and whether the words that you're saying are actually your voice. So I would hasten to say that the wonderful Alfie Boe, whom I adore, really should steer clear of Guns N' Roses and stick with bigger stories because he's got a bigger voice.
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
Yeah, no, 100%. I saw him doing the anniversary Les Mis concert, but that was all Les Mis, so there was no issue of him singing Guns N' Roses.
No, but you know, it's just one of the things. I mean, he's passionate about music and he sang lots of things, and it was a wonderful concert, but that just kind of didn't hit the right mark. So I think as a writer, you need to find the stories that fit your voice. And I'm not saying that your voice can't change, as mine clearly did, or never was light as I thought it was. I mean, my husband thinks I have to drag people through hell before I give them a happy, hopeful ending.
Well, that's you know, just storytelling, isn't it?
Yeah, to a certain extent.
Yeah, but that's a really nice analogy. I've never heard it put that way before, and I know both of those songs, so I know exactly what you're talking about. It also comes to mind is there's a song called "Hurt" by 9 Inch Nails, which Johnny Cash later covered a few years before he died, and the contrast there is the same kind of thing where it's same words, same song, but the voice with which they both sing it is so different, and they're clearly singing about different things. But great analogy, I really like that. Going back to you, and you're signed over at LBA, is that right?
Yes.
And that was eventually through people that you'd met through the industry from being sort of involved with R&A and things like that, was it?
Well, my first agent was Carol Blake at Blake Friedman.
Oh, okay.
Yes, and I met her through the R&A and doing the social media for the R&A. I put them on Twitter, and we were up at Penryn, and it was the night before the conference, and a group of us went out en masse to the local pub, which was called the it was the Boot and Shoe. And I tweeted a picture of it, and Carol came back and said, if it was the Book and Shoe, it would be the perfect R&A pub. And that was the beginning of a beautiful friendship. And so going back to that York conference, I actually pitched to her assistant, Ollie Munson, who was there, who's now at a different agency. I can't remember where Ollie is. But anyways, he looked at me and he said, why haven't you pitched to Carol? And I thought, I'm scared to death. She wrote the Bible, from pitch to publication and everything else. But I realized after that he said, well, she reads your blog posts, she does all of this stuff. So I emailed her the next day and I said, Carol, I'm not ready to submit yet. And that's when I gave her the De Moyer Colt thing. And she said, if you come anywhere near that, I want to hear. So That was April. It was in February. I sent off a fully revised Cornish house and to 4 agents, all of whom I knew. Several of whom had seen 2 of which had seen my work before. By lunchtime, I was in Dubai when I sent it. By lunchtime, I had my first request for a full. And it was really funny because I emailed Carol. I said, "Dear Carol, as your friend and not as a potential client, your book doesn't tell me what to do in this circumstance." And she came back and said, "Right, as your friend, you notify all the other agents of that case." And by Saturday, I had 3 offers, and I chose Carol. One withdrew because she didn't want to get into competition. So that was really lovely. So I actually signed with her officially on Valentine's Day that year, and I had my first offer from the Netherlands on St. Patrick's Day, and it went from there. And then, of course, I lost Carol, and I joined Luigi and Alison Bonomi are now my agents. Luigi's my agent, and I knew him from the Dubai Lit Fest. So again, the more a writer can network, the better.
Yeah, this is something I've heard many times from agents, especially where whether it's you want to get your work sort of published, you want to get more involved in the industry, or you actually want to work in the industry, it's just get involved, just throw yourself into it, meet as many people as you can, speak to as many people as you can. Publishing is such a supportive industry, and so many people out there are willing to lift you up and help you. And the RNA is just one example of the many great organizations that all do that.
Absolutely. And the side of caution is, remember, it is a very small community.
Yeah.
So it works both ways.
Yes. Yeah. If you make enemies, a lot of people will hear about it.
Yes.
Just be nice, everyone.
Absolutely.
And going back to you, dubbed by The Guardian as the queen of the contemporary Cornish novel, what is it about Cornwall that has inspired so much of your work?
As you said that, I'm standing in my study. I immediately turned to the view out my study window. I didn't know when I first came to Cornwall that it would become my muse. Going back to that first book I wrote, it was not set in Cornwall. Every book since then has been set there. I am going to sound totally insane when I say I see stories in the landscape. It just, the landscape inspires me. I've dug into the history. There's just so much. It is my muse.
Yeah. No, I get that. I was in Ecuador last year, and just moving around Ecuador, which is such a mountainous area, and all the cities are sort of very high altitude, and you go up and down and around all these mountains, and just looking at it, I was there was something, I don't want to say that the mountains necessarily inspired a story, but they inspired sort of scenes and sort of settings and things like that, where I was thinking, wow, think how amazing I know what you mean. There's a magic that's conjured up by scenery.
There is. I mean, people have often said to me, because I was in Dubai for 11 years, why don't you write about there? And I think of the times that we were out in the desert, particularly in Liwa Desert, which is near Abu Dhabi. And the vast emptiness filled me. It filled my well, but it didn't inspire stories. So it's, I'm very affected by landscape. There's no question about it. It's like if I see a full moon out my bedroom window casting light, I live in a very old cottage, casting light through these old windows, I start tingling. It's just the way it is. Yeah.
No, that's beautiful. It's such a lovely thought, just to be inspired by nature, I guess, the outdoors and just life. Moving on to something a little bit more technical, I noticed that with your I looked through the books that you've done, and you have a new book coming out called The Impossible Shore. All of your books, apart from The River Between Us and the new one that's coming out, have Cornwall in the title somewhere. How come, and is this just purely a marketing thing, but how come Cornwall is not in The River Between Us in the new one?
Back when I was a debut novelist with the Cornish House, it was decided that Cornwall would be my brand.
Yeah.
And in order to build me and my brand, we went the Cornish House, the Cornish Affair, the Cornish Stranger, Under a Cornish Sky. Then we broke tradition and I wrote The Returning Tide. And that was to the sales team had come back and said, okay, all the titles are starting to sound a little too similar. It's time to break from that and give a bigger audience.
Okay.
That was at the point that my editor moved. And the next book was supposed to be called Varying Things. But 6 weeks before delivery, they changed the title to One Cornish Summer. I had no summer in that book. So I had 6 weeks to find a summer because the book is set from September to January. And yes, it's a book I'm very proud of, but it was an orphan book because at that point I knew I was going to follow my editor to HQ at that point. And she wanted to grow me bigger. So then I did The Path to the Sea, The River Between Us, and now coming up The Impossible Shore. So that people know me as the queen of Cornish contemporary novel type of thing, and they understand that my stories are set there. I now have a base, so it's not as essential to put Cornwall in the title.
Gotcha. Because the people that want that already know, and then now with these sort of more open titles, it's more broad and that's interesting. It's nice to know. Before we get to the final question, what, as someone who I think I'm right in saying that you whilst you have 8 books and a novella, almost 9 books out, it sounds like you consider yourself still a student of the craft of writing, and like we're all constantly getting better. What sort of tricks have you learned along the way that you think aspiring writers could really tap into to help them out?
I think the most important thing, as I mentioned before, I'm dyslexic, but I think it applies to any writer. I have my computer read the book back to me.
Oh.
And for me, my ears are better than my eyes at seeing things. But I think if a computer's reading it to you, they can't put unlike a narrator, they can't put emotion into it. So if a sentence is flat, if a transition isn't there, all those things, just jump out like crazy. And I think it also gives you distance to think of the book as less internal and not yours, so you can be harder with it when editing. And particularly if you're in a publishing cycle, you haven't got a lot of time. I mean, the ideal situation is to write a draft, put it away for a couple of months, come back to it, put it away for a couple of months, But when you're in a publishing cycle, you're lucky if you get a weekend sometimes turnaround. But if you listen to it, which takes time, it's not like 10 hours listening to an audiobook, because if something doesn't work, you suddenly brought up short, you can be listening to a paragraph upwards of 10, 15 times in order to get that flow in. It also helps that you're not embarrassed when the audiobook comes out because you've heard it.
Yeah. And hopefully the audiobook will be more exciting because it'll be a real person putting real emotions into the
yes, and there's the variation that comes into it and everything else. Yeah. But I mean, a clunky sentence read by Microsoft Sam, let me tell you.
Yeah, no, that's a really interesting trick, because I've heard, and it's a very common thing where people will read their writing out or have someone else read it to them to listen to how it sounds when it's read out, because it does feel different. But yeah, I'd not considered that obviously anyone narrating will they'll sort of fix in post, as it were. They'll make tweaks. They'll add punctuation where it wasn't necessarily there before to make the sentence flow better. Yeah, no, that's Microsoft Sam doesn't do that. Gives you the hard truth.
Yeah, I mean, you can pick better voices than him, but sometimes you need something as bad as that.
Yeah, no, that's really helpful. I'm going to try that. I'm definitely going to try that.
And it doesn't sound like your work. So it's easy to think, oh, that doesn't work. That's terrible. And go in and fix it. Whereas sometimes it's very hard to kill your darlings.
Yes, indeed. Yes, it is. Amazing. Well, that brings us on to the final question, which, as always, is: if, Liz, you were stranded on a desert island with a single book, which book would you take?
It would have to be Pride and Prejudice.
Oh,
and yeah, I thought about this a little bit because I obviously read it in my English lit degree and studied it then. I've read it since, and each time I read it, I find something different. And I pretty much forced my middle son to read it. And it was really fun discussing with him because he approached it from a completely different manner and had seen the humor in it, which probably had passed me by in all other readings. So I think it's a book that I could happily reread and take something different from it each time.
Yeah. I mean, it's one of those all-time classics, isn't it? I think it's a story that almost everyone knows or everyone has seen an interpretation of.
Seen an interpretation of. I think, looking at it now as a writer, I think, oh my God, she's broken every single rule, all those things. And I think of when the first time I read it, of course, I was looking at, as a teenager, I was looking at the love story aspect of it. Yeah. But there's the social commentary. There's so much that's going on to take a look at.
Yeah. And she really kicked off the enemies to lovers trope as well.
Absolutely.
Which we all love. So amazing. A great choice. I think Jane Austen is a very popular choice for the desert island. I think everyone loves a bit of Jane Austen.
I think so. Now, if I could take her complete works, I'd really be satisfied. But if I can only have one, for me, it's Pride and Prejudice.
Okay. Pride and Prejudice, the one. Well, thank you so much, Liz, for coming on the show and chatting with me and sharing your sort of your journey and your experience in publishing with me and everyone listening.
Oh, it's been a pleasure. Thank you.
And to keep up with everything that Liz is doing, you can follow her on Twitter and Instagram at Liz_Fenwick, on TikTok at Liz Fenwick Author, or on Facebook also Liz Fenwick Author, or hit the website www.lizfenwick.com. Fenwick is spelt Fenwick, and her new book will be out in October, The Impossible Shore, so look out for that one. To make sure you don't miss an episode of this podcast, follow us on Twitter at Right and Wrong UK or on Instagram at Right and Wrong Podcast. Thanks again to Liz for joining us, and thanks to everyone listening. We'll catch you in the next episode.